All right. Well, we still have some folks trickling in, but welcome everybody. My name is Jennifer Morell. I'm the CEO of the Elections Group. For those of you that might be joining us for the first time, the Elections Group partners with state and local election officials to implement new programs or improve processes for voters and stakeholders. We provide guidance, resources, and direct support for states and local jurisdictions. And our teams are made up of all former election officials from across the United States. And we are so pleased to have you joining us today for List Speak, strategies and resources for communicating about list maintenance practices. That's a mouthful. We're going to try to make this as plain language and easy to follow as we can. But we know list maintenance best practices, they do a number of things. They help ensure the integrity, the accuracy, and the inclusivity of voter registration. List maintenance involves the ongoing upkeep and verification of voter registration records. That includes everything from updating voter information, removing ineligible voters, to ensuring that voter registration records are accurate and up to date. And this process is essential for maintaining the credibility of elections and promoting accurate and secure elections. So voter registration and voter list updates really form the backbone of election infrastructure and promote transparency, fairness, and accessibility. And we're really excited. We've got 4 new list maintenance resources as part of our communication support. We're going to be highlighting those today, and we'll drop those in the chat so you can all follow along at home. But I am so excited to announce our panelists. 2 of my favorite people, 2 folks that I respect tremendously, especially when it comes to all things elections, and especially when we talk about voter registration. First, we have Rob Brock. He's the Deputy Secretary of State and Director of Administration at the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office. Rob, you have been a past president of NASHED. I know you've chaired in the past the Electronic Registration and Information Sharing Center. Oh man, I knew I'd screw that up. Eric, you also are the closest I'll probably ever get to knowing an actual movie star, having starred in a documentary film about the challenges of 2020. Really excited to have you here. Could you take a minute and give our listeners a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to the Elections Group for having Quinn and I to talk about probably my favorite topic when we talk about elections, and that's voter list maintenance. This is certainly the first part of the process to ensure that our elections have integrity and are run well, is to make sure that we have clean, good, accurate voter lists. And so the only thing I'll add to Jennifer's kind remarks is that I served as the elections director for the 8 years prior to me being the Deputy Secretary of State under Nellie Gorbea. So when the Secretary Gorbea was the secretary, I was her elections director, and now under Secretary Amori, the Deputy Secretary of State, and still oversee elections to an extent here in Rhode Island, and really excited to be on this call and with you, Jennifer and Quinn, to talk about voter list maintenance.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And also joining us today, my good friend, Quinn Raymond. He's the co-founder and policy strategist at VoteShield. He's part of the Protect Democracy team. And one fun thing about Quinn, when we first met, I was talking to people about this crazy idea about auditing the voter registration database, and everybody told me it was impossible. And then I met you and you said, I think it is possible. And not only is it, but you've done some amazing work there. So Quinn, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and want to have some mutual admiration for you and Rob as well. And Jennifer, specifically, all of the work you've done on risk limiting audits and educating me on that incredible stuff. My name is Quinn Raymond. I'm the co-founder of VoteShield. We started VoteShield in 2017 with the theory that we could use publicly available voter data to ensure the integrity of elections. I will say that when we started out, I was probably somewhere in the vein of a doubting Thomas in terms of my expectations for what we would find, and a little skeptical of election administration in general, coming from my own set of biases. And the more time I spent looking at this data, and the more work we did with our software to understand how voter data was changing over time across jurisdictions, the more I was convinced it was very compelling to see and affirm the very excellent work that election officials across this country are doing to ensure the integrity of voter rolls and completeness and accuracy of them.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Quinn. So this is a challenging subject. And it's not just challenging this year, but I know when I was running elections, I was always challenged to try to inform voters how voter registration worked. I know that every election office has to contend with that, communicating the whole process from everything from who's eligible to register, the methods for registering, the dates and deadlines for registering, as well as encouraging voters to check their registration, to take some ownership for that, right? Is part of how we ensure it's accurate, up to date. I think coupled with that is the challenge of assuring the public that state and local election officials are working every day to ensure the voter list is well maintained, or clean, as some people like to refer to it. In addition to adding new names and updating names and addresses, this also means placing voters in an inactive status if their address is in question, or removing them if they're not eligible. Election offices are also contending with a not new, but certainly growing this year, false narrative that non-citizens are being registered to vote. So I'm excited to discuss some of our new communication resources, along with the work that you're both doing in your respective roles. We do have a new primer around that we'll put in the chat. I think just communicating the basics of voter registration and list updates in a way that it goes easy on election speak, or sort of avoids the jargon and terminology that often we like to use, can be difficult. So Rob, I want to start with you, and I'd love to hear just generally some of the ways that your office is communicating general voter registration with your voters.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And I think there's no doubt that as election administrators, our central job over the next few months, and then certainly beyond, is to make sure that voters understand the process of elections. And we all know that there are tons of processes in elections, but we've got processes and rules and regulations and laws that govern all of them, starting with voter list maintenance. But I think it's really important that we get out to the voters and we talk about these processes. And we have a really, really good communications team who does a wonderful job on the communication strategies with things like social media. And we've got an Elections Explained campaign there each week, or every couple of weeks, we're putting out little tidbits about the elections process so that folks can understand it. We're doing them on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter so that folks can understand exactly what's going on. We also provide a voter information handbook, which over the years has generally been focused on the statewide questions that are going to be on the ballot. But lately, we've changed our mentality a little bit, still providing that information, but also providing voters information about voting processes, voting by mail and voting early and voting on election day, how to register to vote, how to keep your information updated. So we make sure that voters have that information, and we send one of those guides to every resident in the entire state, so everybody gets one. We also have a whole host of voter education events where we go to community centers, senior centers, schools, church groups, wherever they'll have us. League of Women Voters and all of the ACLU, Common Cause. We work with all of those groups to make sure that we're out into the community, going to where voters are. We know that voters intend to vote in November, but we want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to make sure they're registered where they should be, and that they have the information to cast a ballot. One thing that we've done most recently, and it's a little bit new for the office, is that we've done what we call voter integrity public forums, where we travel around the state and we work with the legislators in particular districts, and we talk about elections. And so we have these forums. Usually we open them up with a little bit of what's going on in elections for about a half an hour, and then open up the discussion for questions from the public. We want to hear from the public. What are their questions? What are their concerns? And we get really good questions about the mail ballot process and how signature verification happens, which is something that a lot of people don't think about. But it's important that voters know, because when you vote by mail, you can be sure that your vote is being counted and that there's integrity in the process. And they talk about other things like certification and voter list maintenance. We do focus a lot on voter list maintenance. And I would argue that, one point that we make is that when we talk about voter list maintenance, usually people focus on removing people from the voter rolls, which is certainly really important, the folks that shouldn't be on there. But it's equally as important to make sure that the voters that are on the voter rolls are where they should be registered to vote. Are they registered from the correct address. When people move, they tend to forget about elections. Most people have moved a lot, and when you do that, you know that you have to rent a U-Haul. You've got to get some friends to help you move, and the last thing you think about is elections until right before the election. And that's why it's our job to get out in front of this, make sure people are registered to vote where they should be, and to make sure that voters are educated about all election processes, including voter list maintenance.
Rob, that's so great. And I hope we're going to get a little bit more into your public forums because I want to learn more about those. I love that you brought up your social media platforms. For those of you listening, if you're not following Rhode Island, you should. You guys always have some really clever, great posts. And I think one of the ways in elections that we learn best is by copying from each other and sharing ideas. So I love the information you guys are sharing on social media. And I think that's awesome that you're using your voter guides to do a little bit of civics education. That's fantastic. Quinn, are there other things we should consider around the basics of registering to vote or the history of voter registration that might inform how we communicate the process to voters?
So I think to build on some of Rob's points, and your points is, first of all, we are absolutely seeing this come up in the conversation so much this year, and it's going to, I think, accelerate, not decelerate, as we get closer to the election. So, I think election officials are so good at being prepared and being ready for any contingency. And this is an example where it's helpful to be prepared. And so one of the things I think about is there's a process to maintaining the voter rolls that every election official on here follows. And first off, just making sure that you're following that process as thoroughly and accurately as possible, making sure that you do have a regular program for list maintenance, making sure that you're inactivating folks, making sure that when they're eligible to be removed after the appropriate waiting time, that they're being removed. And then quantifying that, right? So being able to say, these are how many people we removed. These are how many people we inactivated. If they don't vote in the next 2 federal general elections, they're going to be removed. And I think the idea here is tie the process to the outcome. So the process is, here's our process for how we keep our list clean. And we don't have to go into like really elaborate detail, but at least get the basics down. How many people did we inactivate since the last presidential election? How many people did we remove since the last presidential election? And please make sure those line up with whatever you're telling the EAC. And then being able to say, okay, these are the people we inactivated, these are the people we removed, this is how that process works. And then having those talking points in the hands of everyone in your office who has any contact whatsoever, be it with the media or with voters. And typically having 3 talking points is helpful. People call it a message triangle. You want to come back to those 3 talking points again and again. So talking point number 1 could be that first thing I said, which is, here's how many people we inactivated, here's how many people we removed. It was X% of all the voters in our county. Here's the process for how we do that, and what happens next to those inactivated voters. Talking point number 2 could be maybe just because someone, there's an ineligible registration, right, that hasn't been removed yet, it doesn't mean that's going to be a fraudulent vote, right? That's a very tiny percent of all of those votes, of all of those registrations that are ineligible end up fraudulently voting. So being able to convey that in some way that is helpful, I think, that it's not a one-to-one. Anytime you have an inaccurate registration, you're going to have a fraudulent vote. And then I think maybe a third talking point might be, and we're always trying to do better. And here's the work that me and my team are doing to innovate and to get this to the ideal, which is a voter list that is both complete and also accurate.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we're going to get in just a little bit into how we can use data like that to communicate. But I love that you pointed out it's not just talking the talk, right? But we have to actually be doing it, walking the walk, right? And that can be challenging. So I agree with you. If we're going to say we do the thing, we better make sure that the checklist is being followed, that folks are taking care of those maintenance practices on a daily basis, like we're saying. And I agree. I love thinking about a unified message. And I think that's where, as we were thinking about resources to help election officials better communicate, thinking about plain language, simplified statements, that not only could you use with voters, but probably makes it easier if you're going to get everyone in your office on the same talking point, or everybody using the same terminology and phrases. So I think that's so important. Thanks for walking us through that. So I want to share something I heard recently from an election official, and actually I've heard this from a few officials lately, is, Jennifer, how do I explain to people that I can't just delete people from the rolls? We have laws and policies that have to be followed. We know that how we update voter rolls is critical, but it is also very technical. You both talked about some of those practices that we follow, and we know that some offices have found success trying to explain the difference between an active voter, an inactive voter, what it means to be removed, what a pending voter is. And I think it's especially important to help people understand what we mean by inactive. I think that's one of those areas where there sometimes is confusion about, how do we make somebody inactive? Why are they inactive? What does that mean? How does that impact their ability to vote? We created a template slide presentation, and I think we'll drop the link in the chat here in just a second. It includes speaker script that's focused on using plain language to help election offices explain that list maintenance process, including those definitions. There's 13 slides. I think we're going to look at 3 of them real quick. Here we go. Great. So really just wanted to have like 2 or 3 bullets to talk about when voters are added, when voters are considered pending. We can go to the next slide. When voters are removed, so what are some of the criteria for removing them? Certainly some of the ones we're familiar with. And then one more. And then what that means to be inactive. And maybe we've simplified it too much, right? We've got their mail was returned undeliverable. They've not voted in recent general elections. We know the timing varies. And they did not respond to an address confirmation mailer. Okay, we can take the slides down. So I guess my question to you guys, are these short definitions, does this seem adequate? Are there other explanations or different ways that you've found are useful in explaining this kind of complicated process of maintaining voter rolls? And Rob, you mentioned your community forums that you've spent some time covering this topic. So I'd love also maybe to hear from you if those have been effective, particularly around this communicating these practices.
Sure. Thanks, Jenna. And I think most of us on the webinar here have spoken with voters directly when they call with questions or concerns or skepticism. And I'd argue that any one of us, if we got 15 or 20 minutes with a particular voter, we could really do a good job of explaining an entire process, whether it's voter list maintenance or mail ballots, what have you. The problem is that we can't do that with every voter. It's just not a reasonable approach. And that's why we've turned our attention to these community forums, so that we have 50, 60, 70 people show up and we can talk about these things in depth. And that's really the reason why that we've done them. And we're hoping, and we actually ask the attendees to go out and talk to their families and their friends and cast as wide a net as possible, talking about these intricacies, because they are confusing, especially when we're talking about elections at the national level. For example, inactive, the word inactive, which I think is one of the biggest misnomers in elections. Jennifer, I think you hit it on the head with those slides, but there are slight variations within states. Like, for example, in Rhode Island, an inactive voter simply means that a piece of official elections mail has been returned undeliverable to an elections office. It doesn't mean that you haven't voted. It doesn't mean anything other than the mail comes back undeliverable. It has nothing to do with response time either. So once they're made inactive a voter, if they don't vote in one of the next 2 federal elections, they can be removed. But it's really important to explain that to folks, because I think when you think of the term inactive, most non-election officials think, oh, this must be a non-voter. There's no voter activity with an election, and that's not what inactive means. So I think this is really where the community forums have been effective, that we can actually take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long it takes, to explain these types of processes to voters, and they walk away saying, wow, I didn't realize. And Quinn, to your point a little bit a while ago, when we talk about voter list maintenance, we have to have deliverables. And so one of our most recent deliverable is that when we sent mail ballot applications to all of our registered voters ahead of the 2020 election, that mailing initiated the undeliverable mail of about 60,000 people. And so after the 2022 election, when those 60,000 people didn't vote in 2020 or in 2022, we removed them from the voter rolls. And we did a press release about it, and we were transparent about it so that people know that these things are happening in a non-election year. So I think, Jennifer, to your original question, I think these community forums have done quite a bit of, it has been helpful to voters who are looking for information. And it's myself, it's the Secretary of State, and our elections director, Kathy Placencia, and we sit at a table in a community room, in an auditorium, and we stay as long as it takes to answer every question. And these are the type of questions that get asked. And so it's really important that we really relay that information and get the correct information out there.
Yeah, there's just no substitute, is there, for that personal human face-to-face interaction. I think that's fantastic. And I love, Rob, that you brought up the word transparency. I especially appreciate, I went on your website and saw that press release. Well done. You know, it's really, I think sometimes a mystery. And I've seen news articles in the past where, you know, ex-official just mass deleted, you know, so many thousand voters. I love that you guys spelled out how many, why you did it, when you did it. And that's really important. So kudos. Quinn, we're going to talk in just a minute about your program, but do you have anything you want to add in terms of kind of explaining some of those fundamentals?
I think just Rob really hit it on the nose. There is always an instinct when we're being threatened, being attacked, to sort of tortoise, right, and take cover. And that is a completely natural human instinct. Ultimately, it's not going to be a successful approach or strategy in the conflict to ensure free and fair elections in the United States. So regardless of what ideology your skeptical voters are coming from, they have concerns, and it's our responsibility to address them. And I think Rob's point here of going out and really engaging with them is tough, but ultimately the only thing that will be meaningful or have an impact is going out and having those conversations with voters where they are.
Fantastic. We're going to pivot just a teeny bit from the communication. This part of why this process is so difficult is because every day, right? People are moving, they're dying, they're getting married, they're changing their names. All kinds of things are happening to this very dynamic list. And so I'm curious, Quinn, in thinking about some of the other challenges that election officials face with maintaining accurate voter lists and communicating that process with the public, if there are ways that technology can help us address these challenges. And we're going to turn a little bit of time over for you both to answer that question and to give us a little presentation on VoteShield.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the setup. Let's give it a shot. So very briefly, what I would love to do is just share some of the work that we do at VoteShield and our thinking about this problem, right? Having better visibility into how voter registration data is changing over time. So VoteShield is software that monitors public voter databases. And so just to be crystal clear with everyone, this is not any proprietary data. This is not sensitive PII. This is the same publicly available file at the state level that campaigns, PACs, parties, NGOs, and election integrity advocates are requesting already. It's the same public process for getting that data. We track changes to public voter records over time using our software, typically on a weekly basis. As we get closer to an election, even more rapidly. We show election officials in their jurisdiction changes over time so they can see how their data are changing. And we use statistics and machine learning to flag anomalies. Don't worry, no AI, but statistics and machine learning can be really helpful to spot something that is different. It doesn't mean it is bad. It doesn't mean that someone has hacked into your database. It's just mathematically interesting and worth taking a look at. And then we can send emails, an email report that's just a very simple text email that says, hey, here are the changes we saw this week in the public file. Here are the registrations. Here's the removals. Here are sort of the more notable things we've spotted, which can just be helpful for situational awareness for a local election official. We also have data scientists at VoteShield who are dedicated quantitative political scientists who are trained not just in the federal laws that govern these questions, but also in the local state laws that are relevant to the states they're analyzing. So of course, if we saw something, we would say something and reach out. And you would hear it from us. You wouldn't turn on the TV and see on cable news. So that has been our approach, and it's been really helpful. And anytime we've raised an issue with an election official, we've been able to resolve it, or they've been able to explain to us why we were wrong, which occasionally happens. So things that we worry about, we do worry about cyber attacks on voter databases because it's a very scalable, cheap attack that can undermine elections even when they're unsuccessful. As we all know, there's a lot of conflict in the world and a lot of folks across the international community who may have a vested interest in our elections in one direction or another, or simply to create chaos. And so we want to protect against that and spot any unusual changes that are occurring. We know that good faith user error can lead to inaccurate data, angry voters, and litigation. And that's not a good outcome for US democracy at all. So making sure that, that everything is correct and that the data are accurate is really important and can dramatically reduce the caseload in our courts. And also worth noting, the public is now analyzing this data themselves more and more, and many citizens have concerns. And of course, some of those concerns are legitimate, and some of those concerns are maybe partisan and maybe coming from bad faith. But regardless, any discrepancies in the publicly available voter data can be used to attack the integrity of election administrators. And that also is not good for democracy or for election administrators. So our software can help solve for these problems. The values of our team are really straightforward, and I hope they align with yours, which is number one is that all qualified, lawful, eligible voters are entitled to participate in free and fair elections. Number two, the ideal voter file should be both complete and accurate. And to Jennifer's point, in any given county in the country, on any given day, someone is turning 18, someone's being convicted of a felony, someone is passing away or moving away or moving into town. So it is impossible to have a totally complete and accurate voter file. And that may be worth communicating to voters as well, why that is. The third value, and I think this is really important, and again has been validated by the analysis we've done on data since 2017, is that election officials are working in good faith towards these goals. By and large, we're kind of like the Maytag repairman. Like we sit around, not a lot of stuff happens that seems unusual or improper. If there is something that makes us scratch our head, we reach out. And if it is really a legitimate issue where a process wasn't followed exactly correctly, we make sure it gets fixed and we work with election officials to fix it before it impacts an election in any direction. And then finally, public confidence in our electoral system is critical to our democracy. So being cognizant of the space we take up in the world and how that will impact voters' perceptions of our democracy is important. We work with election officials across the political spectrum. Our first partner was Paul Pate, Secretary Paul Pate of Iowa, wonderful partner. We work with both him, his director of elections, his data analyst, and the 99 county auditors in Iowa to ensure that their voter registration data is correct. We also work with Michigan, and we have done a lot of good work with them and numerous other states as well. If you need references or have questions, please reach out. The tool itself is accessed via the web, via a secure portal. It's exclusively available to in-state election officials. If you are an election official and you're interested in this, please reach out. And if we have it available in your state, we will stand it up for you and get you an account. And do a training with you if you're interested. I will skip the live demo today because I know we have a lot of time, but just some quick screenshots. This is a timeline of removals in Colorado. So again, this is all coming from the full public voter file and every change to every record in the file, both if a row is deleted, if it is added, if field is changed, if someone's party is changed, we will see all of those things here, and we can track those, not just removals, but all of the other change types that would be relevant to an election official. Party changes, name changes, address changes, those kinds of things as well. We can do a rapid analysis when we see a change. So if we see a spike in removals, we can see the history of all the changes that occurred to these records prior to that, which is really helpful to contextualize that and understand, oh, these people were inactivated years ago. They missed 2 federal general elections, and now, per the NVRA, they're being removed. Good. That looks great. One thing that we see a lot is just age. So the gray is all of the voters in this particular county, in Ashe County. And that is normally what we see is some kind of flattish sort of mountain. And then the green are the removed voters in irregular maintenance. And this is very normal. This is what we see across the country in every jurisdiction, is that there's a heavy over-indexing for younger voters being removed, usually around between the age of 25 to 35. Those are the people who are most impacted in these maintenances. And for any change in your data, you would be able to see this analysis right away just by clicking on it. We have anomalies, again, not an indication of malfeasance, hacking, or any other problem, just mathematically interesting and sometimes worth taking a look at to make sure everything is as it should be. And we can also see changes across the counties over time. And this is really one of the coolest and most useful things. And this, I know it looks like bathroom tile, but what it is these are removals in Colorado over time. And you can see the regular list maintenances that the state is doing. And because Colorado is a very top-down state, you can see them in very straight lines on any given date. If there was a maintenance, it really hit every single county in the state. If you're in a bottom-up state, it's not going to look like this. It's going to be a lot more scattered in terms of when local election officials are doing their maintenance. But I'm happy to say that by and large, all of the local election officials that we've been looking at have been doing their maintenance regularly. So we can also flag ballot data. So if you have mail ballots and there's a file that keeps track of these mail ballots, again, a publicly available file, not proprietary information to your office, we can spot potential issues in mail ballots. So one thing, of course, that everyone is concerned about is ballot harvesting, election fraud related to mail ballots. And our tool can spot addresses where large numbers of ballots are going to. In this case, in Dubuque, Iowa, 122 ballot records were being requested at this single address. And when you click on the address in our tool, it will pull up a photograph of the building, and it will show you that this is actually a convent, a nunnery, and the nuns are voting. I think that's okay. So we're not going to worry about that one. People have asked how we're funded. It's a project of cross-partisan 501c3 Protect Democracy. We must be nonpartisan. We have over 3,500 donors. Funding cannot come with preconditions or it is refused. So if someone comes to us and they say, we want you to find voter suppression in this one state, or we want you to find election fraud in this other state, we can't take that money. And also that would be wrong and stupid. Some of our funders include the Joyce Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, and the Skoll Foundation. And we, of course, have very good cybersecurity, but we can take that offline. I'm going to pause there. I realize I'm going down the rabbit hole, so I'll stop. Jennifer, thank you for giving me the time to explain what VoteShield is. If you're interested, please reach out to me and I'll set up a demo for you.
Well, Quinn, I don't know about our listeners and participants today, but when I see data visualization like that and those graphs and numbers, I get very excited. It's also a reminder to me, though, that the sheer volume of data associated with voter registration records can make it really difficult for people to understand how list maintenance works. And so providing data visualization or and the changes, as you showed, that are being made can be a really effective way to help people understand what's happening month to month. So Rob, I want to turn back to you. Rhode Island uses data visualization to highlight voter registration numbers on your website. And I think we're going to pop that up so that our participants can see that. But can you talk a little bit more about the data you're displaying? Anything you want to share about the project, any feedback that you've gotten from people? And mostly I'm curious, Rob, if voters or other stakeholders have found this helpful.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. And this was something that kind of goes back to our transparency piece, making sure that this information is available. We have, as election administrators, we have a ton of information, and it's really important that we share it as best we can in a way that's easy for people to digest. So we've got a data director here in the office who is just tremendous. And she created this data hub, and she's done it across our office, with business services and archives. And here's the elections piece, and it just shows the registered vote total by party, and you can choose, whichever piece of geography you'd like, whether it's a full city or town, whether it's a precinct, whether it's a state Senate district, a state representative district. We also have, the number of inactive voters, active voters, pending voters by party. And what's really important is that people can actually go to this site, and you can look back. I think we started this back in 2018, and you can see how the voter list has changed over time. And that shows that voter list maintenance is happening. And I know that people are looking at it, because we get contacted quite a bit, especially from folks in the media who find it really useful, but also voters who are data driven, and they'll call and say, can you just explain to me why in May of 2024, you've got 723,622 registered voters, but in April of 2024, you had 725,000 registered voters. And we can explain that we did a list of, or a series of voter list maintenance mailings where we were able to remove people from the voter rolls because we contacted folks who moved to another state. So people are actually looking at this information, but it's really important that we provide it so that folks can actually see in black and white, or there's a little bit of color there too, that you can, that we actually are doing our job with voter list maintenance. And so it's very interactive. You can see the graphs, you can see all sorts of stuff that make it easy for people to digest. And I think, you can see there that there are 723,000 active voters. We've got 48,000 inactive voters, just over 5,000 pending. And people will call with questions about what is a pending voter? Why are there 5,200 people that are pending? And we explain that in Rhode Island, when you register to vote, it takes 30 days before you become an active voter. And that's what those 5,200 folks are. But it's really important for folks to have access to this information. And because we've got a really good data director who's able to take the data that we have and make it look pretty and nice and easy for people to digest, really, really important.
Rob, thank you so much. I get excited looking at this again. I'm certain somebody's going to ask, you mentioned you have a data director, sort of the resource commitments to doing something like this. Is this a full-time position for that director, or is this something they carve out how much time does it take to do this?
Yeah, it is a full-time position, and it's not enough. So Jess Signa is the data director. She's wonderful, and she's the data director for the entire office. And so Secretary Gorbea and then Secretary Amori felt it was really important to have someone do this job full-time. And I think even more folks could do it full-time, because I think when you have this information, and again, I'm talking generally business data, archives data, when we've got this information as a government entity, I think it's important that we are able to, just good government practices, provide that to people. And not only are we able to provide it to people, but people can easily understand it. And when we talk and have a conversation about something with someone on the phone, and you're unable to show graphics and pie charts and all of that, it's much more difficult. So to be able to have this information and have somebody take it and turn it into a story is really the point here, and really, really important. And so we can't say enough about the work that our data director does. And she does a whole lot with voter list maintenance. And it's also, telling the story about how the mail ballot process. And we've got a graphic designer who's tremendous as well. And they work together to tell that story. It's certainly, for someone like me, much easier to understand a graph, a picture, a storyboard than it is to read a paragraph and try to explain or understand what election officials are trying to explain.
I love that. And I never thought about that, telling your story with data. I'm sure people love, especially they can go down and choose their jurisdiction and really get the story for the community that they live in. I will just point out, we also have a new resource we'll be dropping in the chat that will help those of you that are new to data visualization start thinking about ways that you can use it and some easy tools to get started. Quinn, before we move away from this though, I'm curious, you communicate some really technical things directly to state and local officials that you're working with. I'm curious what role data visualization has played in that work in helping those officials understand the things that you're detecting or analyzing.
So I think maybe a common factor that VoteShield has with this beautiful site that Rhode Island built is the ability to explore, right? And obviously, most of the time when we're having conversations, time is of the essence, and we really want to make sure that we get our message across, whatever that is, whatever the most relevant thing is. You don't have a lot of time to convince someone that you're doing a good job, so you want to make the most of it. But the thing about data visualization versus a static PDF that you just throw up on a website every 3 months is that it's interactive. You really can explore it in a way that you couldn't in other media, and that can be really helpful for an election official who's trying to understand the dynamics of their electorate, how it's changing, where they have challenges, et cetera. And because election officials know their jurisdiction so much better than we ever could, putting it in their hands, I think, is meaningful and important, because they'll be able to spot things we never would, because they know what's going on. They know that there was a church registration drive 2 weeks ago, and that's why they've had an influx in registrations, for instance. So putting those tools in their hand and letting them explore with it is helpful. I think it can also, of course, be helpful in communicating more broadly. We've long wanted to do a public reporting tool, but we have a Hippocratic oath of doing no harm. So if we are going to do it, we're going to do it in a very careful way that wouldn't inadvertently further put more misinformation out into the conversation. And I just have tremendous respect for Rob and his team and the work they're doing here, because that really is not easy. We've looked at it, so it's not easy.
Yeah, super impressive. Thanks so much. I'm going to pivot a little bit. We'll keep this one fairly short, but we have tried to highlight in the slide deck that I mentioned previously some of the sources that election officials use to maintain voter lists. So these are things like cross-state programs like ERIC, obviously our online voter registration system, or our Department of Motor Vehicles, state agencies, that's corrections, health, human services, courts, national change of address through the U.S. Postal Service, Social Security Death Index, as well as local lists that things like obituaries or deceased letters, returned election mail. Rob, I'm just curious if you, well, one, if I'm missing anything that you use in Rhode Island or that you do differently, but also if you think it's helpful to share some of those sources with the public, or if you have shared in your public forums those sources that you are using to compare your voter list against.
We do, and Jen, we do all of those that you mentioned, which I know most of the listeners probably do as well. And yes, we do share that, because I think a lot of folks don't realize that it's a team effort. And that's the slide that we use when we talk about some of this stuff, is that it's a team effort. We mentioned the DMV and corrections and vital statistics and ERIC, National Change of Address, the post office. And so it's really important to talk about a kind of a full frontal attempt to make sure that our voter rolls are as accurate as possible. One additional source, and I'm going to bring our data director back into it in her work, but we also go out of our way to get public information or publicly available data from other states and try to use that to help us keep our voter rolls updated. So the state of Florida, for example, is not part of ERIC, but we know that a lot of Rhode Islanders moved to Florida. And so Jess will be able to get the publicly available data from Florida and do her own matching. And what we'll do is we'll send letters to folks who we may believe have moved to Florida. And we simply say, hey, it looks like you may have moved to Florida. If this is the case, please sign this form and put it in the postage paid return envelope that we gave you and send it back to us. And it's been really successful. It's not ERIC, but it's the best that we can do. And so that's another source. We're using an internal staff member who goes out and is a whiz with data and is able to get information that we're all able to get. It's publicly available, and use that to our advantage to keep our voter rolls accurate. And I think we just have to find ways to keep ourselves ahead of everything else. I mean, when we talk about people moving, again, the last thing they think about is registering to vote until it's almost too late before an election. So if we can bring that to them and make it easier for them, again, I think it's part of our job as government employees and government entities to try to bring this stuff to the voters if we can. And so that's an extra step that we take. But it's really important, I think, to highlight the partnerships that we have and all of you have with your local and state and even federal agencies that help keep our list as accurate as possible.
Thanks. That's super helpful. And yeah, I think for the average voter, they would probably be pretty amazed to realize that on a regular basis, you're matching your list against all of these different sources. So I think that's awesome that you're sharing that in your meetings. Quinn, I wonder if you have anything else you want to add, just thinking about the way election offices do the matching against these external data sources.
Well, first, elephant in the room, Eric is the best at this, right? Eric has the biggest data set across the most states. And I'm sorry that Rob and his team have to now do additional labor because the Florida data is no longer available in Eric. And that's really bad for voters across the whole country, and also for taxpayers too, because from an economic efficiency point of view, in terms of the cost of implementing list maintenance, I think Eric is by far the most efficient compared to sending out dozens and dozens of postcards over time. But setting that aside, I would say that the biggest thing, and one of the things that's so good about Eric is having a consistent matching algorithm, a consistent criterion for matching to records. Record matching is actually a really complicated question in computer science. And having an open, consistent, and transparent matching criterion for two disparate records is really, really important, because the matching criterion you use, the algorithm you use, can dramatically impact the number of false negatives or false positives, or in some cases both, right? And you want to really have something that is as accurate as possible. The thing I've always appreciated about Eric is they have explained what their matching criterion is in terms of the tool they use for that, and that is a commercially available piece of software that other people can look at too. Barring that, thinking about, again, what is the matching criterion to determine that two records are the same person, whether it's in New York County, across counties, or across states is essential. I think having that done at the state level rather than the local jurisdiction is really preferable, because then it ensures per the NVRA that you have a uniform process across jurisdictions in the state. And then I think also thinking about temporality, so thinking about the relative comparative age of two data sets that you're comparing. So for instance, if you're looking at a file, if you're checking for citizenship and you're looking at a list of people who are residents but not citizens and have applied for a driver's license or some other thing, but that file is 2 years old, and you're comparing that against your current voter data, it may be that a lot of those people, it certainly is that a lot of those people have become naturalized and now are eligible to be registered to vote. So making sure that you have apples to apples, not apples to orangutans, I think is important in doing that matching.
That's super helpful. And I think you brought up the two elephants in the room, actually, because I do want to talk a little bit more about this growing concern surrounding eligibility and voter registration. We know there are basic minimum requirements to register to vote in every state. That's been the case for a very, very long time. One being that voters must be a US citizen. I am curious if either of you have received an increase in questions regarding this topic, meaning non-citizen voters or eligibility of voters. And just quickly, how you've responded, or how have you seen other election officials respond?
Yeah, we've received it, and we've received it for years, and we continue to receive it. And I think the first piece is, Jennifer, you hit it right on the head, is that it's a crime if you're not a United States citizen to vote in a federal or state election here in the United States. I mean, it's already a crime. In my experience, the folks who are here who are not US citizens, the last thing they want to do is put themselves in a position where they're asked to leave the country because they registered or cast a ballot, which again is a crime. So my experience has been that folks who are not citizens, they're not looking to cast ballots. They're not looking to get on voter rolls and all of that. And in very few instances in my almost 20 years in elections, you have someone that may have registered to vote in error, not realizing or not understanding the form, and not casting a ballot, but just not realizing that what the form meant or stated. But it's important to explain the process. And I'll just quickly give you the Rhode Island process. If you're not a United States citizen here in living in Rhode Island, and you're able to get a driver's license or a state ID, if you don't provide the proper documentation to the DMV to indicate you're a citizen, you're not even asked the election questions on the keypad here in Rhode Island. So you're not even eligible to answer the question, and in turn, your data is not sent to the Secretary of State's office on voter registration. And I would imagine that all states have some similar process that make it or prevent folks who are not citizens from getting to that election question. But just like anything else in elections, mail ballots, voter list maintenance, or citizenship, it's really important that we explain the process and that we talk about this, because the more that we talk about it and the more that we explain that there are guardrails that we all have in place to make sure that this does not happen, the more people are going to understand it and believe it, as they should. So I think it's something that keeps coming up. And I know that there's talk about, laws and things. I mean, it's already a crime for a non-citizen to cast a ballot in a federal election in the United States. So but it's important that you explain each of our individual states and counties and localities how this process works. So just like anything else, we have to do a good job of explaining how it works in our jurisdictions.
And I appreciated the way you explained that. I could visualize each of those steps as you were going through it. For those of you that are listening, we have a new fact sheet. It's called Voter Eligibility and a U.S. Citizen. Well, I probably got that wrong. It's meant to be a template. It's meant to do similar to what Rob just said, give you a starting point, use it, customize it, think about your state's process for that. But I agree, Rob, the more we can get information like that out in front of people, I think the more this will just become a matter of fact. Quinn, is there anything you want to add? Anything that you've seen other election officials, ways you've seen them respond?
First off, I'm amazed. It's like there's an app for that. Like literally every topic, you're like, oh, I've got something for this. I got something for this. I got something for this. It's amazing. VoteShield monitors publicly available data. So we look at data that is public, which is the voter registration database and ballot requests when that's available. We don't have access to people's private data that is sensitive PII. So we don't know, we have no way of knowing someone's naturalization status. We have no way of knowing their driver's license number or the last four of their social security or any of the other really proprietary data that election officials have access to and can use to validate the integrity of elections. And not only does VoteShield not have access to that, but no other outside group has access to it as well. So if someone comes to you with a report saying, oh, we found hundreds of thousands of duplicates in this voter database, they really have no way of knowing that because they don't have the sensitive PII that you would need to know to figure out if these are true duplicates or just people with very similar names and birthdays, which is quite common in this country. We live in a massive country. The odds that two people have the same name and the same birthday are actually quite high. So the matching criterion, again, I'm a broken record with it, but it's really important. And the fields that you're matching are really important. So I know and can trust election officials with that sensitive information. They've been given that authority and they have access to it. No one else does. And anyone else who claims to is lying. So I say, listen to election officials on this one.
Well, we could just end there, but we do have 6 minutes left and we don't have any, doesn't look like we have any questions teed up. Certainly, those of you that are listening live, you're welcome to drop some questions if you do have them, but I'm going to give you each a chance. Got kind of a massive sort of like thinking philosophical sort of ending question. What are the steps? We've talked about a number of them to ensure that voter registration and list maintenance efforts are transparent, that they're accountable, and that they're free from partisan influence. And then how do we balance this need for accurate voter lists with concerns about voter suppression and disenfranchisement? I know that's a lot, but sort of closing thoughts. Again, Rob, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, transparency is so important, and I think that people trust election officials. They're many of our friends and our family members, and to hear from them, I think is really important. I'll tell a quick story about I had an issue with my car. And I went to my mechanic. I know nothing about cars. And I was asking questions about the bill that he was going to charge me to fix my car. And I could tell that he was getting frustrated. And then I put myself in his shoes and I said, wow, that could be what it's like for someone who doesn't really follow elections all that much and doesn't know about the process. And I put myself in his shoes saying, boy, he shouldn't be getting upset with me because I'm trying to ask questions about something I don't know about. So I think it's important that we all remain patient and understand that people who vote once every 2 or 4 years don't understand the process. And I think it's incumbent upon us, and I know it's frustrating, but it's incumbent upon us to be able to explain that process or processes to folks. And it's important to do it in a nonpartisan, bipartisan, whichever phrase you want to use, manner. Because I think that today things have become so polarized that we need to be the ones that are not polarizing at all. This is about administration. This is the blocking and tackling of a sports reference of elections. It has nothing to do with partisanship. Republicans, Democrats who are running elections are making sure that elections are run smoothly, safely, and securely. It doesn't matter what's going on in other states or in Washington when it comes to politics. So I think we have to understand that people who may not focus on elections are coming at it from a different angle. They're coming at what they see on the news, what they see that's going on at the federal level and maybe in some of our state houses. But it's important that we stick to the facts, we stick to elections administration topics and not get involved with the political thing. So I think it's really important to be transparent, be nonpartisan, and be patient.
Thanks, Rob. Well said. Quinn.
Don't think I can top that. I will say, I would add to that, don't throw your colleagues under the bus. I have been working with election officials across the country in very red, very blue, and very purple places. I've worked with folks who are in very rural places, very suburban places, and very urban places. And I will say, by and large, they're all doing an incredible job. And one thing I've noticed sometimes is when someone is under attack, you try and divert the blame. They say, well, I don't know how elections are run over there, but here we do right. And that is really misplaced because we're having we have a national election, we have a federal election, right? And all of us have a vested interest in our citizens having good reasons why they should believe that it is free and fair. And that's up to us collectively. So don't throw your colleagues under the bus. I would say also being cognizant, and Jennifer, you brought this up at the very beginning of the conversation. I'm sorry I didn't answer it better, but understanding the history of voter registration and why it came to be. So it actually was very much born of anxiety that people had about immigrants and immigrant communities in the 19th century coming in and voting or impacting the outcome of elections. And so it was simultaneously an effort of reform to ensure the integrity of the process, and also often fueled with xenophobia. And understanding that history, I think, is important, and the context of it is important. And then also understanding the context of voter suppression and how for a century or more, this was used and weaponized against Black people in our country, often fatally if they tried to register to vote. So I think being really clear and understanding that history and the complexity of the history and how we got to the place we got to, I think is important. Not throwing your colleagues under the bus, and doing the best you can in a situation that is pretty challenging. I know you're under-resourced. I know it's not fair, but we really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Quinn. It's a great place to end. Reminds me of a phrase I used to use when in presentations. We're at our best when we face challenges together. And certainly this is, if ever there was a year for us to be united and supporting one another, it is now. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Quinn. This has been an amazing discussion. The resources we mentioned in today's discussion have been placed in the chat. As always, our inbox is open, so if you have additional questions, either for us at the Elections Group or for Rob or Quinn, please email us at support@electionsgroup.com, and we will move those messages to where they need to go. Thank you, and we'll see you all next time.